The November air carried a crisp bite as Claire Thompson maneuvered her old Subaru through the manicured streets of Willow Grove, a suburban enclave just outside Philadelphia. The dashboard clock blinked 4:47 p.m., and the fading daylight painted the colonial-style homes in hues of amber and gold. Her two children, Noah, 11, and Olivia, 8, sat in the back seat, their chatter a soft hum against the radio's low murmur of a classic rock station. Claire's hands tightened on the steering wheel, her knuckles pale. Tonight was Thanksgiving at her sister Allison's house, and the invitation, delivered via a curt text 2 weeks ago, felt more like an obligation than a gesture of warmth. "Mom, why do we have to go to Aunt Allison's?" Olivia's voice piped up, tinged with the blunt curiosity only a child could wield. Her small fingers toyed with the zipper of her puffy jacket, her hazel eyes catching Claire's in the rearview mirror. Claire forced a smile, the kind she'd perfected over years of shielding her kids from her own uncertainties. "It's Thanksgiving, Liv. Family time. Plus, I made my famous pumpkin pie. You know it's a crowd pleaser." Noah snorted, slouching deeper into his seat, his hoodie obscuring half his face. "Yeah, if they even notice it. Last year, Uncle Greg ate like 3 slices and didn't say a word." Claire's chest tightened, but she kept her tone light. "Well, this year's pie is even better. I added a secret ingredient." She winked at Noah, hoping to coax a grin, but he just rolled his eyes and turned to stare out the window. The truth was, Claire had spent hours perfecting that pie, her kitchen filled with the warm scent of cinnamon and nutmeg as she rolled out the crust from scratch. It wasn't just dessert, it was her offering, her proof that she belonged at Allison's table despite the years of subtle slights and unspoken judgments. Allison, with her sprawling mansion, her tech exec husband, and her perfectly curated life, had always been the golden child. Claire, the younger sister, was the one who'd stumbled divorced at 32, raising 2 kids on a freelance writer's income, living in a modest apartment that never quite felt like home. As they pulled into Allison's driveway, Claire's breath caught. The house loomed like a magazine spread come to life. White columns, black shutters, and a wreath of autumn leaves on the double front doors. Strings of fairy lights twinkled along the roofline, and the faint sound of jazz drifted from within. Parked cars lined the street, sleek SUVs and polished sedans, each one a reminder of the world Claire no longer inhabited, if she ever had. "Wow," Olivia whispered, pressing her nose to the window. "It's like a castle." "More like a museum," Noah muttered, but he unbuckled his seatbelt and grabbed the pie dish from the front seat, holding it with exaggerated care. Claire smoothed her sweater, a navy knit she'd chosen to look understated but polished, and led her kids to the door. The weight of the evening pressed against her ribs. She wanted to connect, to bridge the gap between her and Allison, to give Noah and Olivia a sense of family beyond their small trio. But doubt gnawed at her. Would they be welcomed or merely tolerated? Allison answered the door in a burgundy dress that hugged her Pilates-toned figure, her blonde hair swept into an effortless chignon. "Clary, you made it!" Her smile was wide, but didn't reach her eyes. She leaned in for an air kiss, her perfume a sharp floral that made Claire's nose itch. "And Noah, Olivia, look at you, growing like weeds." Olivia beamed, but Noah just nodded, clutching the pie dish tighter. Allison's gaze flicked to it, then back to Claire. "Oh, you didn't have to bring anything. We've got catering from La Belle Vie. But how sweet." Claire's stomach twisted, but she kept her smile in place. "It's just a little something, homemade." "Well, come in, come in. Everyone's in the dining room." Allison ushered them inside, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. The foyer was a vision of autumnal elegance. A chandelier casting golden light, a console table adorned with gourds and candles, and a mirror reflecting Claire's own nervous expression. Voices and laughter spilled from the dining room, where a long table gleamed with crystal and china. Claire recognized a few faces: Cousin Sophie with her warm laugh, Uncle Greg already halfway through a glass of bourbon, and Allison's husband Mark, holding court with a story about his latest startup venture. But there were others, too. Neighbors, colleagues, strangers whose polished ease made Claire feel like an interloper. "Claire, you remember Sophie?" Allison said, gesturing to their cousin, who stood near the fireplace, her auburn hair catching the light. Sophie's face lit up. "Claire, oh my gosh, it's been forever." She pulled Claire into a hug, then crouched to Olivia's level. "And you must be the famous Olivia. I hear you're an artist." Olivia nodded shyly, clutching Claire's hand. "I like to draw animals." "Well, you'll have to show me later," Sophie said, then turned to Claire, her voice dropping. "That pie smells amazing. You're going to steal the show." Claire's cheeks warmed, a flicker of pride cutting through her nerves. "Thanks, Soph. I hope so." But Allison was already moving, her attention elsewhere. "Let's get you settled," she said, leading Claire and the kids through the dining room and down a hallway. Claire's steps faltered as they passed the bustling table, where guests were piling plates with herb-roasted turkey and truffle-mashed potatoes. The hallway opened into a small, dimly lit room that smelled faintly of detergent. A folding table sat in the center, flanked by mismatched chairs. A washer and dryer hummed in the corner. "Here we are," Allison said, her tone brisk. "I thought it'd be cozier for you and the kids. The dining room's a bit crowded and, well, you know how it is." She waved a hand, as if dismissing the arrangement's oddity, and was gone before Claire could respond. Noah set the pie on the table, his jaw tight. "Cozier? This is the laundry room." Olivia's brow furrowed, her voice small. "Why aren't we with everyone else, Mom?" Claire's heart lurched. She knelt beside Olivia, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "It's just a special spot for us, sweetie. More room to spread out. And we get to keep the pie all to ourselves." She forced a laugh, but the lie tasted bitter. Her eyes stung as she stood, busying herself with arranging their coats on a chair to hide her face. The truth was stark. Allison had relegated them to the margins, a physical manifestation of the distance Claire had always felt. Growing up, Allison had been the star, cheerleader, valedictorian, the one their parents boasted about. Claire was the quiet one, the dreamer who scribbled stories in notebooks and never quite measured up. Even now, with Allison's life a polished facade, Claire had hoped for a moment of connection, a sign that family meant something. Instead, she was here, in a room that smelled of fabric softener, her children's confusion mirroring her own. They sat at the folding table, the hum of the dryer a mocking backdrop. Claire served slices of pie, the crust golden and flaky, and tried to keep the conversation light. "So, Noah, tell me about that new game you're playing, the one with the dragons?" Noah shrugged, poking at his pie. "It's fine. You wouldn't get it." Olivia, more eager to fill the silence, launched into a story about her school's art fair. Claire listened, nodding, but her mind drifted to the laughter echoing from the dining room. She imagined Sophie praising her pie, Uncle Greg taking a second slice, Allison noticing her effort. But the fantasy dissolved as the door remained closed, the party carrying on without them. "Mom?" Olivia's voice cut through her thoughts. "Are we not invited because we're not fancy enough?" The question was a knife, sharp and precise. Claire's breath caught, her eyes meeting Olivia's wide, searching ones. She wanted to scream, to march into the dining room and demand a seat at the table. But she couldn't. Not for herself, and certainly not for her kids, who deserved a mother who shielded them from cruelty, not one who exposed them to it. "No, Liv," she said softly, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "It's not about that. Sometimes people just make choices that aren't about us. But we're here, together, and that's what matters, right?" Olivia nodded, but her eyes held a flicker of doubt. Noah stayed silent, his fork scraping the plate. Claire reached for their hands, squeezing gently, her smile a fragile shield against the hurt. As they ate, Claire's gaze wandered to the small window above the dryer, where the night sky was a deep indigo. She thought of her blog, a quiet corner of the internet where she poured out her struggles, raising kids alone, stretching a budget, finding meaning in the mundane. It was raw, unpolished, written in stolen moments after the kids were asleep. She'd never imagined it reaching beyond a handful of readers. But it was hers. A space where she felt seen. In this moment, in this laundry room, she clung to that small truth. Her voice mattered, even if her sister couldn't see it. The hum of the dryer stopped, leaving a sudden silence. Then a new sound, a low rumble, growing louder, like an engine approaching. Claire frowned, glancing at Noah, who'd perked up, his head tilted toward the window. "Is that a car?" he asked. Before Claire could answer, headlights swept across the window, bright and blinding. The rumble became a purr, and then it stopped. A car door slammed, followed by the sharp click of heels on pavement. Claire's pulse quickened, an inexplicable sense of anticipation stirring in her gut. The laundry room door swung open, and Allison stood there, her expression a mix of confusion and irritation. "Claire, there's someone here for you." "For me?" Claire's voice was barely a whisper, her mind racing. No one knew she was here, except Allison. Her friends were scattered, her life too small for unexpected visitors. Allison stepped aside, and a woman entered, her presence commanding despite the simplicity of her black coat and scarf. She was in her late 40s, with sharp cheekbones and warm brown eyes that seemed to see straight through Claire. Her dark hair was pulled into a low bun, and she carried a leather portfolio, its edges worn from use. "Claire Thompson?" the woman asked, her voice smooth but firm. Claire nodded, rising from her chair, her hands clammy. "Yes, that's me." The woman extended a hand, her smile genuine but purposeful. "I'm Rebecca Sullivan, director of Rising Voices. I'm sorry to interrupt your holiday, but I've been trying to track you down." "Track me down?" Claire's mouth went dry, her mind scrambling. Rising Voices. She'd heard of it. A non-profit that amplified underrepresented stories through conferences and publications. But why would they want her? Rebecca's eyes softened, as if sensing Claire's bewilderment. "I read your blog. The post about navigating single motherhood. The one where you talk about teaching your son to tie his shoes while holding back tears. It hit me hard. It's real, Claire. Raw. Exactly the kind of voice we need." Claire blinked, her breath shallow. Her blog? The words she typed in the dark, the ones she sometimes regretted for their vulnerability, had reached this stranger? She glanced at Noah and Olivia, who were watching wide-eyed, then back at Rebecca. I don't understand." Rebecca stepped closer, her voice low but urgent. "We're hosting a national conference in D.C. next month focused on resilience and authenticity. I want you to be a keynote speaker. Your story, your truth, could inspire thousands." The room spun. Claire gripped the edge of the table, her knees weak. A keynote speaker? She wasn't a professional, wasn't polished like Allison or charismatic like Mark. She was just Claire, the woman who burned toast and cried over unpaid bills. "I'm not. I've never spoken in public. I wouldn't know where to start." Rebecca's smile didn't waver. "That's exactly why we want you. You're not a polished pundit. You're real. People are hungry for that." Noah leaned forward, his voice cutting through the haze. "Mom, that sounds kinda cool. You should do it." "Yeah," Olivia added, her eyes bright. "You're always telling us to be brave. This is, like, super brave." Claire's throat tightened, her kids' words anchoring her. She looked at Rebecca, then at the laundry room's peeling wallpaper, the folding table, the pie crumbs scattered like tiny stars. This was her life, messy, overlooked, but hers. And now someone saw it. Someone believed it mattered. I need to think about it," she said finally, her voice trembling but resolute. Rebecca nodded, pulling a card from her portfolio and handing it to Claire. "Take your time, but not too long. The limousine's waiting outside if you want to discuss this over coffee. No pressure, but I'd love to tell you more." A limousine? Noah's jaw dropped, and even Allison, still hovering in the doorway, looked stunned. Claire's heart pounded, a mix of fear and exhilaration. She glanced at her kids, their faces alight with something she hadn't seen in a long time. pride. She thought of her blog, of the stories she'd buried in her heart, of the table she'd never been invited to. Maybe this was her chance to build her own. "Okay," she said, her voice steadier now. "Let's talk." As she gathered her coat and ushered Noah and Olivia toward the door, Claire felt the weight of the evening shift. The laundry room, with its hum of rejection, had become something else. A crucible, a beginning. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of possibility. Rebecca led the way to the limousine, its sleek black frame gleaming under the streetlights. Allison trailed behind, her heels clicking faster, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Claire, what's going on? Who is this woman?" Claire didn't answer. She climbed into the limousine, Noah and Olivia piling in beside her, their laughter filling the plush interior. As the door closed, she caught Allison's stunned expression through the tinted window, a fleeting image of the life she was leaving behind. The engine purred to life and Claire leaned back, her hand resting on Olivia's. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like hers to travel. The limousine glided through the quiet streets of Willow Grove, its leather seats creaking softly as Claire Thompson shifted, her fingers still clutching Rebecca Sullivan's business card. The card was simple, cream stock embossed with the Rising Voices logo and Rebecca's title, Director of Narrative Programs. But to Claire it felt like a talisman, heavy with possibility and peril. The streetlights cast fleeting shadows across her children's faces. Noah, slouched but alert, his eyes darting between the tinted windows, and his mother. Olivia, curled against Claire's side, her small hand tracing the stitching on the seat, her earlier excitement tempered by the late hour. The hum of the engine was a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of Allison's laundry room, where Claire had sat just moments ago, pie crumbs scattered like the fragments of her self-worth. Rebecca sat across from them, her posture relaxed, but her gaze intent, as if she could see the storm of thoughts churning in Claire's mind. The limousine turned onto a main road, the suburban mansions giving way to strip malls and gas stations, their neon signs glowing in the November night. Claire's heart pounded, a mix of adrenaline and dread. She'd agreed to talk, to hear Rebecca out, but the weight of that decision pressed against her ribs. A keynote speaker? At a national conference? The idea was absurd, a fever dream born in the haze of her sister's rejection. Yet here she was, in a limousine, her kids beside her, heading toward an unknown destination, with a woman who believed in her words. "Mom, this is like a movie," Noah said, breaking the silence. His voice held a grudging awe, but his brows were knit, a telltale sign of his unease. At 11, he was old enough to sense when things were off-kilter, to question why a stranger had shown up at Aunt Allison's house in a car straight out of a music video. Claire forced a smile, her hand brushing his knee. "It's definitely unexpected." She glanced at Rebecca, who was typing something on her phone, her fingers swift and precise. "Where are we going, exactly?" Rebecca looked up, her smile warm but professional. "There's a little diner a few miles out. Rusty's. Best coffee in the county, and it's quiet enough to talk without interruptions. I figured you'd want a neutral space to process this." "A diner sounds perfect," Claire said, though her stomach twisted. Neutral space or not, she felt exposed, as if Rebecca could see every crack in her carefully constructed facade. The single mom who stretched every dollar, who wrote blog posts in the dark to keep herself sane, who'd just been banished to a laundry room by her own sister. She tightened her grip on Olivia's hand, anchoring herself in her daughter's warmth. Olivia yawned, her voice soft but clear. "Are you going to be famous, Mom?" Clara's laugh was brittle, catching in her throat. "Hardly, Liv. I'm just talking to Miss Sullivan about something I wrote." "Not just something," Rebecca interjected, her tone firm but kind. "Claire, your blog, Shades of Enough, it's extraordinary. The way you weave your struggles with your kids' dreams, the rawness of it. It's the kind of storytelling that cuts through the noise. People need that. They're starving for it." Claire's cheeks burned, a mix of pride and embarrassment. Her blog was a lifeline, a place where she poured out the mess of her life, her divorce, the nights she cried over utility bills, the small victories of Noah's science fair win or Olivia's first watercolor painting. She'd started it 2 years ago, after her ex-husband, Brian, moved to Seattle with his new fiancée, leaving Claire to navigate parenthood alone. The blog was anonymous, or so she'd thought, posted under the pseudonym Ellie Gray to protect her privacy. How had Rebecca found her? And why did she think a handful of late-night ramblings qualified Claire to speak to thousands? "I don't understand," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you even find my blog? It's not big. I barely get comments." Rebecca leaned forward, her eyes glinting with something like excitement. One of our program coordinators, Maya, stumbled across it during a late-night scroll. "She sent me your post about teaching Noah to tie his shoes. The one where you talk about how his frustration mirrored your own, how you both kept trying even when you wanted to give up." I read it and couldn't stop. "I went through every post, Claire. Your story about Olivia's dream to be an astronaut, how you saved up for a telescope even when you couldn't afford it. That's the kind of authenticity we're looking for at Rising Voices. We want you to share that at our conference." Claire's throat tightened, her mind flashing to that post. She'd written it after a particularly brutal month, when the car needed new tires and the rent was late. Olivia had seen a documentary about NASA and spent weeks talking about the stars, her small face alight with wonder. Claire had scoured thrift stores and online marketplaces, finally finding a used telescope for $50.00. The night they set it up in the apartment's tiny backyard, Olivia's gasp at the sight of Jupiter's moons had felt like a victory, a moment of magic in a life too often defined by scarcity. Writing about it had been cathartic, but she'd never imagined it reaching someone like Rebecca. "I'm flattered," Clara said, her voice trembling. "Really, but I'm not a speaker. I'm not qualified. I don't have a degree in anything fancy, no credentials. I'm just a mom who writes to keep from falling apart." Noah shifted, his hoodie slipping to reveal his earnest face. "Mom, you're always saying we don't need fancy stuff to be good at something. Like when I messed up my science project and you said it was okay to try again." "Yeah," Olivia piped up, her voice fierce despite her sleepiness. "They picked you because you're you. That's enough, right?" Claire's eyes stung, her kid's words slicing through her self-doubt. She looked at them, Noah with his quiet resilience and Olivia with her unshakable faith, and felt a surge of love so fierce it nearly undid her. They believed in her, even when she couldn't believe in herself. But the fear remained, a cold weight in her chest. What if she failed? What if she stood on that stage and froze, her words drying up, exposing her as the fraud she felt she was? Rebecca watched the exchange, her expression unreadable but kind. "Claire, I get it. This is a big ask. But let me be clear, we don't want a polished TED Talk. We want you, your story, your voice. The conference is in D.C., 6 weeks from now. You'd have time to prepare, and we'd support you every step of the way. Coaching, travel, everything covered. You just need to say yes." The limousine slowed, pulling into the parking lot of Rusty's Diner, a low-slung building with a neon sign that flickered red and blue. The lot was nearly empty, save for a pickup truck and a lone motorcycle, its chrome glinting under the streetlights. The driver, a taciturn man in a black cap, opened the door, and a blast of cold air swept in, sharpening Claire's senses. As they stepped out, Claire's phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She glanced at the screen. A text from Allison. "What the hell, Claire? Who was that woman? Call me." Claire's jaw tightened, the memory of her sister's dismissive tone flooding back. She silenced the phone and shoved it deep into her pocket, her resolve hardening. Allison's shock, her sudden interest, only underscored the truth Claire had glimpsed in the laundry room. Her family didn't see her, not really, but Rebecca did. Inside the diner, the air smelled of coffee and fried onions, a comforting contrast to the sterile elegance of Allison's mansion. Vinyl booths lined the walls, their red cushions cracked but inviting. A waitress with a name tag reading Darlene waved them toward a corner booth, her smile genuine. "Coffee's fresh, folks, take your time." Claire slid into the booth, Noah and Olivia flanking her, their coats piled beside them. Rebecca sat opposite, setting her portfolio on the table. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow, but Rebecca's presence softened the space, her calm authority grounding the moment. "Okay," Claire said, her voice steadier now. "Tell me more. What exactly would I be doing?" Rebecca's smile widened as if she'd been waiting for this. "The conference is called Unheard Stories. It's our biggest event of the year. 3 days, 2,000 attendees, from activists to educators to everyday people who want to make a difference. Your keynote would be on the second day, a 20-minute talk followed by a Q&A. We'd want you to share your journey, single motherhood, the challenges, the triumphs, the way you find meaning in the small moments. Your blog post about Olivia's telescope, for instance? That's the kind of story that could light up the room." Claire's mind raced, picturing a stage, a sea of faces, her voice trembling through a microphone. She'd never spoken to more than a handful of people at once, usually at Noah's school events or Olivia's art shows. The thought of thousands watching her, judging her, made her stomach lurch. But then she thought of her blog, of the nights she'd typed until her fingers ached, pouring out truths she couldn't say aloud. Those words had reached Rebecca, had moved her. Maybe they could move others too. "What if I mess it up?" Claire asked, her voice raw. "What if I get up there and nothing comes out?" Rebecca leaned forward, her hands clasped. "You won't. And even if you stumble, that's part of what makes you compelling. People don't want perfection. They want honesty. They want to see someone who's been knocked down and keeps getting up. That's you, Claire." Noah nudged her arm, his voice low but firm. "You got this, Mom. You're like the toughest person I know." Olivia nodded, her eyes bright. "Yeah, you're tougher than the Hulk, and he's green." Claire laughed, the sound surprising her, a release of tension that felt like a small victory. She looked at her kids, their faces lit with belief, and something shifted inside her. The laundry room, Allison's dismissal, the years of feeling less than, they didn't define her, not anymore. "Okay," she said, her voice clear now, resolute. "I'll do it." Rebecca's face broke into a grin and she reached across the table, squeezing Claire's hand. "That's the spirit. Welcome to Rising Voices, Claire." Noel whooped, startling Darlene, who was refilling a coffee pot nearby. Olivia clapped, her small hands making a muffled sound against her mittens. Claire's heart swelled, but the fear lingered, a shadow at the edge of her excitement. She was stepping into the unknown, and there was no turning back. As they ordered coffee and hot chocolate, Rebecca pulled a tablet from her portfolio, scrolling through a document. "Let's talk logistics. We'll fly you and the kids to D.C., cover your hotel, and set you up with a speaking coach. But first, I want to know more about your blog. Which posts mean the most to you?" Claire hesitated, her mind sifting through the dozens of entries she'd written. "There's one about Noah's first soccer game after the divorce," she said finally. "He was so nervous, kept tripping over the ball. I wrote about how I cheered even when he missed, how we both felt like we were failing but kept trying. It's not flashy, but it's us." Rebecca nodded, her fingers flying across the tablet. "That's perfect. That's the kind of story we want. Anything else?" "There's one about the time I lost my job," Claire admitted, her voice quieter now. "I was a copywriter for a small agency, and they downsized. I wrote about telling the kids we'd have to skip Christmas presents, how Olivia made me a card that said, 'You're my present.' I cried writing it, but it felt true." Rebecca's eyes softened and she set the tablet down. "Claire, that's why you're here. Those stories, they're not just yours. They're universal. Every parent who's struggled, every person who's felt invisible, they'll hear themselves in you." The conversation stretched late into the night. the diner's warmth wrapping around them like a cocoon. Claire shared more, her fears, her hopes, the small moments that kept her going. Rebecca listened, her questions sharp but kind, drawing out details Claire hadn't realized mattered. Noah and Olivia dozed off, their heads resting on the booth's cushions, hot chocolate mugs empty beside them. As the clock neared midnight, Rebecca closed her portfolio, her expression thoughtful. "One last thing, Claire. Your blog. It's anonymous. If you do this, you'll be stepping into the spotlight. People will know your name, your story. Are you ready for that?" Claire's breath caught, the weight of the question settling over her. She thought of Allison, of the family who'd dismissed her, of the readers who might judge her. But she also thought of Noah and Olivia, of the life she wanted for them, a life where they saw their mother as someone who dared, who spoke, who mattered. "I think so," she said, her voice steadied despite the tremor in her hands. "I want to try." Rebecca nodded, her smile a mix of pride and determination. "Then let's make it happen." The limousine ride back to Claire's apartment was quiet, the kids asleep in the back seat, their faces peaceful. Rebecca had offered to drop them off, and as the car pulled into the parking lot of Claire's modest complex, Claire felt a pang of self-consciousness. The peeling paint, the flickering streetlight. It was a far cry from Allison's mansion or the diner's cozy glow. But Rebecca didn't comment, just handed Claire a folder with conference details and a promise to follow up tomorrow. As Claire carried Olivia inside, Noah stumbling sleepily behind her, she glanced back at the limousine, its taillights fading into the night. The folder felt heavy in her hand, a tangible reminder of the leap she'd just taken. She thought of the laundry room, of the realization that had crystallized there. Her worth had been unrecognized, but it was real, and now someone saw it. Someone believed it could change the world. Inside the apartment, Claire tucked the kids into bed, their soft snores filling the small space. She sat at her kitchen table, the folder open before her, and opened her laptop. The blog's dashboard glowed on the screen, its modest stats a reminder of its quiet reach. But as she scrolled through her posts, she saw them anew, not as confessions, but as stories, each one a thread in the tapestry of her life. She opened a new post, her fingers hovering over the keys. For the first time, she didn't write as Ellie Gray. She typed her real name, Claire Thompson, and began, "Tonight, I learn that being pushed aside isn't the end. It's the beginning, and I'm ready to tell my story." She hit publish, her heart racing, and closed the laptop. The apartment was silent, but the air felt charged, alive with possibility. Claire didn't know what the next 6 weeks would bring, but she knew one thing. She was done hiding. The stage was waiting, and she would find her voice. Claire Thompson sat at a wobbly bistro table in La Petite Étoile, a cozy French restaurant in downtown Philadelphia, the kind of place where the waiters wore bow ties and the menu listed wines she couldn't pronounce. The scent of fresh-baked baguettes mingled with the faint tang of her own nervous sweat. Across from her, Rebecca Sullivan slid a contract across the table, its pages crisp and official, the Rising Voices logo embossed in gold. Claire's hands trembled as she reached for it, her chipped nail polish a stark contrast to the document's polished sheen. Noah and Olivia sat at a nearby table, engrossed in a game of tic-tac-toe on a paper placemat, their giggles a lifeline in the storm of Claire's thoughts. 6 weeks had passed since the limousine ride, since the diner where she'd said yes to the impossible. 6 weeks of late-night writing sessions, voice coaching via Zoom, and moments of panic so intense she'd nearly backed out. But here she was, on the cusp of signing her name to a keynote speaker contract, a step that felt like jumping off a cliff and hoping for wings. "Take your time," Rebecca said, her voice calm but warm, her dark eyes steady. She sipped her espresso, the tiny cup looking absurdly delicate in her hands. "This is a big moment, Claire. You're not just signing a contract, you're claiming your voice." Claire laughed, a nervous bark that drew a curious glance from a waiter. "Claiming my voice? I'm just trying not to throw up on this very fancy tablecloth. She glanced at the contract, the words blurring: keynote speaker, national conference, unheard stories. It was real. Noah looked up from his game, his pen poised over an X. Mom, you're gonna crush it. Like, superhero level crush it. Yeah, Olivia chimed in, her face smudged with chocolate from a croissant. You're gonna be like Wonder Woman, but with better stories. Claire's heart swelled, her kid's faith a balm to her fraying nerves. She picked up the pen, its weight grounding her, and signed her name, Claire Thompson, in a looping scrawl that felt like a declaration. The moment the ink dried, a strange calm settled over her, as if she'd crossed a threshold she couldn't uncross. She wasn't just a single mom, a failed copywriter, a laundry room outcast. She was a storyteller. And her story mattered. Rebecca clapped, her grin wide. Welcome to the big leagues, Claire. Now, let's order some dessert to celebrate. I'm thinking creme brulee. Noah's eyes lit up. Can we get two, one for me and one for Liv? Kid, you drive a hard bargain, Rebecca said, winking. Two it is. As the waiter whisked away the contract and brought dessert, Claire felt a shift, subtle but profound. This wasn't just about a speech or a conference. It was about redefining her purpose, about building a life where she and her kids weren't sidelined. She looked at Noah and Olivia, their faces glowing in the candlelight, and knew she was doing this for them as much as for herself. The morning of the Unheard Stories conference in Washington, D.C., Claire stood in her hotel room, staring at her reflection in a full-length mirror. The navy blazer and cream blouse, borrowed from a thrift store with a triumphant $20.00 price tag, made her look almost professional, but her eyes betrayed her terror. Her speech, scribbled and revised 100 times, sat on the desk, its pages dog-eared and coffee-stained, and she'd practiced in front of Noah and Olivia, who'd given her thumbs-ups and mercilessly teased her for saying too often. But this was different. 2,000 people waited in the ballroom downstairs, their expectations a weight she could feel in her bones. Mom, you look like a boss, Noah said, sprawled on the hotel bed, his sneakers dangling off the edge. He was fiddling with a Rubik's Cube, his latest obsession, the colors clicking under his fingers. Olivia, perched on a chair, was sketching a rocket ship in her notebook. Yeah, like a president or something. Can you make a law that we get ice cream every day? Claire laughed, the sound easing the knot in her chest. If I pull this off, ice cream's on me. Deal? Deal, Olivia shouted, then added, but no mint chocolate chip. That's gross. Claire took a deep breath, smoothing her blazer. Rebecca had coached her to focus on her story, not the audience. Tell the truth, she'd said. That's your superpower. But as Claire stepped into the elevator, her kids trailing behind with their VIP badges, the truth felt like a fragile thing easily shattered. The ballroom was a sea of faces, the stage a stark island under blinding lights. Rebecca introduced her, her voice booming through the speakers. Claire Thompson, a voice of resilience and authenticity, whose blog, Shades of Enough, has touched hearts across the country. The applause was polite but distant, a reminder that these people didn't know her, didn't owe her anything. Claire walked to the podium, her heels clicking too loudly, her notes clutched like a lifeline. She looked out at the crowd, educators in blazers, activists with notebooks, parents who looked as tired as she felt. Her mouth went dry, her heart a frantic drumbeat. For a moment she was back in the laundry room, invisible, unworthy. Then she saw Noah and Olivia in the front row, their faces alight with pride, and something clicked. Hi, she said, her voice wobbling. I'm Claire Thompson, and I'm terrified right now. A ripple of laughter spread through the room, unexpected and warm. She relaxed just a fraction and leaned into it. I mean, I'm standing here in a blazer I got for $20, trying to pretend I know what I'm doing, but I don't. And that's kind of the point. She told her story, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. She spoke of the divorce that left her reeling, the job loss that stripped her pride, the nights she cried over bills while her kids slept. She talked about Noah's soccer game, how his missed kicks mirrored her own failures, and Olivia's telescope, a $50 0 cents dream that lit up their world. She shared the laundry room, the sting of her sister's dismissal, and the limousine that changed everything. Her voice cracked when she mentioned her blog, how writing had saved her, how it had led her here. "I used to think I wasn't enough," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "Not smart enough, not successful enough, not anything enough. But my kids taught me that's a lie. And so did all of you by listening today. We're all enough, just as we are." The room was silent for a heartbeat, then erupted. The applause was thunderous, a wave that lifted Claire to her feet. People stood, clapping, some wiping tears, others nodding as if she'd spoken their own truths. Noah and Olivia were on their feet, whooping like they were at a rock concert, and Claire laughed through her tears, the sound raw and free. For the first time she felt her voice's power, not as a whisper in the dark, but as a beacon. Back in Philadelphia, the high of the conference carried Claire through a whirlwind of change. A literary agent contacted her after the speech, floored by a viral clip of her talk that racked up millions of views on social media. By spring, she'd signed a book deal for Enough and More, a memoir weaving her blog posts with new reflections on resilience and family. The cover, a photo of Claire with Noah and Olivia in their tiny backyard, telescope pointed at the stars, became a symbol of her reclaimed life. When she held the first copy, its weight in her hands felt like a promise kept. To herself, to her kids. The book's release brought interviews, podcasts, and a flurry of emails from readers who saw themselves in her story. Claire read each one, often late at night, her heart full. A single dad in Ohio wrote about buying his daughter a sketchbook after reading about Olivia's art. A teacher in Texas shared how she'd used Claire's book in her classroom, sparking discussions about worth and struggle. The words she'd once typed in secret were now a bridge, connecting her to a world she'd never imagined. But the true test came the following Thanksgiving, a year after the laundry room. Claire's apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom with mismatched furniture and walls covered in Olivia's drawings, was alive with warmth. The table, borrowed from a neighbor and wobbling despite Noah's attempts to fix it, groaned under the weight of a feast. Turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans, and of course Claire's pumpkin pie, its crust golden and fragrant. The guests were her chosen family. Rebecca, who'd become a mentor and friend. Sophie, her cousin, who'd sent a heartfelt apology for not speaking up at Allison's. Darlene from Rusty's Diner, who brought her famous pecan pie. And Maya, the Rising Voices coordinator, who'd first found Claire's blog. Noah and Olivia darted between the adults, their laughter mingling with the clink of glasses and the hum of conversation. Claire stood at the head of the table, a glass of sparkling cider in hand, and raised it. "To family," she said, her voice steady. "The ones we're born with, the ones we find, and the ones we build. Thank you for being here." The room cheered, but Olivia tugged at Claire's sleeve, her face serious. "Can I say something, Mom?" Claire blinked, surprised. "Of course, Liv." Olivia climbed onto a chair, her pigtails bouncing, and cleared her throat with exaggerated gravitas. Hi everybody. I just want to say, this is the best Thanksgiving ever. 'Cause we're not in a laundry room, and Mom's not sad, and we're all together. That's what home is, right? Not a fancy house, but us." The room fell silent, then erupted in applause, Darlene wiping her eyes with a napkin. Claire pulled Olivia into a hug, her throat tight. "You're absolutely right, kiddo." Noah, usually shy about speeches, stood up, his cheeks red. "I'm proud of you, Mom. Like, really proud. You're awesome." Claire's eyes welled, and she laughed, swiping at her tears. "Okay, you two, stop making me cry. Let's eat before the pie gets cold." The meal was chaotic, joyful, filled with spilled cider and Sophie's terrible puns about gobbling the turkey. Claire watched it all, her heart full. This was her table, built from love and resilience, not obligation or status. Allison had sent a text earlier that day, "Happy Thanksgiving, let's talk soon?" But Claire hadn't replied. She wasn't ready, not yet. Her sister's world felt distant, a memory she could choose to revisit or leave behind. Months later, at the next Unheard Stories conference, Claire sat at a round table with 5 other women, their stories as varied as their backgrounds. A former inmate turned advocate, a refugee who'd built a community center, a teacher who'd survived cancer. The room was smaller, more intimate, but the energy was electric. Claire listened as the women shared how her book had inspired them, one to start a blog, another to speak at her church, a third to forgive herself for past mistakes. "I read enough and more in one night," the advocate said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your story about the telescope, it made me realize I could dream big for my kids too, even after everything." Claire's cheeks warmed, but she nodded, her voice steady. "That means the world. I wrote it hoping someone would see themselves in it, and hearing that, it's everything." The moderator, a journalist with a sharp wit, leaned forward. "Claire, you've gone from a laundry room to a national stage. What's next? Another book? A TED Talk? World domination?" The room laughed and Claire grinned, her nerves eased by the camaraderie. "World domination's a bit ambitious. Maybe another book, though, and definitely more pie. I'm getting pretty good at crusts." The laughter swelled, but the question lingered in Claire's mind as she left the stage. What was next? She'd learned that being sidelined wasn't the end. It was the spark that had shaped her into a storyteller, a woman who built her own table. She thought of her blog, now a public platform with thousands of followers, and the letters piling up in her inbox. Each one was a story, a voice waiting to be heard. Back at the hotel, Noah and Olivia were waiting in the lobby, their faces lit by their phone screens. Noah looked up, grinning. "You nailed it, Mom. I saw people crying, like actual tears." Olivia nodded, holding up her sketchbook. "I drew you on the stage. See, you've got a cape, 'cause you're a superhero." Claire laughed, pulling them into a hug. "You two are my superheroes. Don't forget that." As they headed to the hotel restaurant for a celebratory dinner, Claire felt a quiet certainty settle over her. Her journey wasn't over. It was evolving, each step a chance to lift others as she'd been lifted. The laundry room, the limousine, the stage, they were all part of a story still unfolding. One she'd tell with humor, heart, and the hard-won truth that enough was more than enough.